This is the AMD RX 480, and it features new Polaris architecture and a $200 starting price. This then aims to be the ultimate price performing graphics card. But is it? I got my hands on the 8GB version to find out. So then, the RX 480. AMD's response to Nvidia, and rather than going down the high-end route and trying to have a Titan competitor, a 1080 competitor, they've come out with the 480, which aims to actually offer most people great price performance at a sort of price that most people will be willing to pay. And so here we have the RX 480. Now this is the 8GB version, so this is 8GB of VRAM, but if you do want to save a little bit more, then $200 gets you the 4GB version, whereas this 8GB version is roughly $30, $40 more, or of course translate that into pounds, euros, or wherever you are buying. Taking a closer look at the card reveals an HDMI 2.0 port and 3 DisplayPort 1.4s. For most people these are all the connections you're going to need, but if you are a DVI user, beware, you will need an adapter. You'll find a single 6-pin connector on the top for power, and then this being the reference design, you've got a blower style cooler. And overall the card, it doesn't feel as premium when you touch it, but I think they've done an absolutely cracking job of making a card that looks premium, even though it's not necessarily the most premium of designs. And this is definitely one area where this particular design does shine, but if you do want to look at something that runs a little bit quieter, runs a little bit less hot, then a partner card is going to offer you those things. And this card, while it doesn't run loudly, as soon as you get gaming you can definitely hear this card, but under normal load and under zero load you're not going to hear this card at all. Overall though, I like the design and I don't think that the noise levels are going to disturb most people. Plugging this thing into your PC should be relatively straightforward due to its smaller size and that single 6-pin power connector. And while you won't find a fancy backplate or any RGB LEDs, the thing you will find is brilliant gaming performance. Starting our benchmarks off with Hitman shows that while this thing isn't a GTX 1070, it's not actually that far off at all. And for most of you, 76 frames a second on a 1080p monitor is probably what you're after. But even if it's not, even if you're all about the ultra settings, 1440p, you can still average 57 frames a second, which is remarkably impressive. And of course, that's not with any of the settings really turned down, that is at the ultra preset. Looking at an artificial benchmark like Valley shows that, in theory, the 480 is a fair way off the 1070, but I haven't really found this to be the case in real game benchmarks. And the results only get more interesting once we look at Far Cry Primal and we crank up the resolution. Because this utilises the HD textures, the RX 480 with its 8GB of VRAM can quite happily run the game without issue. Whereas the GTX 980 and the Fury Strix with their 4GB clearly struggle, and as a result their minimum and then their average frame rates do drop. Whereas of course the GTX 1080 and 1070 don't have this issue. And the same thing sort of really applies to Batman. Once again, this is a game that requires a lot of textures and they require a lot of place to store them, and then you'll see the RX 480 competing very well with both the 980 and the Strix, but not to the same extent as Far Cry Primal. Going to something that's a little bit less heavy on the VRAM though confirms that the GTX 980 is a faster card than the 480, but the 480 isn't very far apart. The fact that you can run a game on 4K on a card that's priced $199 is very, very impressive. And if those benchmarks weren't actually enough for you, taking a look at the Vulkan API shows that with OpenGL we go from 61 frames a second, and literally just changing the API to the new Vulkan API, we go to 74 frames a second. So if we can do that in a load of other games, we're going to get some very impressive performance indeed. And so, there you have it, the AMD RX 480, a card that delivers brilliant performance at 1080p and 1440p, and while you're going to want to look at something else for 4K gaming, for 1080p and lower end 1440p gaming, this is a cracking card. And don't forget, you can now overclock these with the built-in software into the AMD drivers if you want to push these things further. But my advice would be to get the 8GB version, And depending on price, because it all does come down to price with a card like this, definitely consider looking at a partner card, so something like a Gigabyte, Asus, MSI, any of those. All of those cards generally have been pretty good. We will be testing some out, but compared to the likes of the Strix 1070, yes, that's a more powerful card, but arguably this is a more impressive card because it is considerably cheaper and offers brilliant performance, and you can always crossfire it later on if you happen to want a bit more performance or come into some cash. And overall, this wins the top purchase award. I'm very impressed, to say the least, and if you do upgrade from something that's a little bit older, you're going to see a massive difference, and I can't wait to see what the Vulkan API enables for this thing. And so there we go, a massive thank you to you guys for watching this review. Thanks to AMD for getting this sample out and Corsair for sponsoring the channel. Like this video if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't, leave a comment, subscribe for more graphics cards reviews, and please go and check out the GTX 1070 review you can find in the little eye. A massive thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.